So let's take a look at the RPG-8 Arpeggiator in Reason. I'm just going to come over to the instrument section here and we'll bring in an NXT and use the default grand piano patch. I'm also going to put a bit of reverb on that just because I like how that sounds with the arpeggiator. Take that down a bit and we'll get that out of the way. And after selecting the NXT, in order to load your RPG-8, you just drag that into whatever instrument you're using just below, and Reason will then automatically make the connections that are necessary for these two devices to work together. So if I press tab and flip the rack back around, you can see that we've got the gate and CV connections and also connections for your mod and pitch wheel. If I press K on my keyboard, we can kind of hide that cable and you can see what's been done in the back. I'll press K again to show that and tab to flip around the front. So let's just start from left to right here and cover every control that we've got. First and foremost, you've got a little LED here showing that MIDI information is being received into the RPG-8. Now, in order to make this device work, you do need to be sure that MIDI focus is set. I'm using version 8.3 of Reason, so this version has the capability to choose MIDI focus within the rack itself. So if I were here with the NXT, and I'm going to F3 and close the browser, and F4 to bring up my on-screen piano keys. I want you to see what's going on here. I'm going to be using my computer keyboard to play these devices. But you can see what's going on and what I'm pressing. So if your MIDI controller or on-screen keyboard, the MIDI focus is set to the NXT, you're not going to get the arpeggiator effect. So it's important to be sure that you've have the RPG-8. If I F7 and come to the sequencer, that just means that you've got the gray arrow there versus here. I'll F6 to come back to the rack, and the whole point that I wanted to make about this first item is if you're having any issues with sound and getting the RPG-8 to work, just be sure that the LED is lighting up, so then you can troubleshoot and at least you know that it's receiving the MIDI information. So moving on, next we have the velocity area here. And with this you can choose manual, which is what it's on by default. So in manual mode, the velocity that is played by the arpeggiator, the notes that it creates in its sequences, are going to play back just as you play in. So whatever velocities you're playing on your MIDI keyboard, they're just going to pass straight through to the patterns that are created by the RPG-8. Now I'm using my on-screen keyboard and the velocity is set to 127, so every note that the RPG-8 creates in that pattern is going to have a velocity of 127. If you're using a MIDI controller that's velocity sensitive, then it's going to be however hard you press the keys. You also have the option to spin this dial counterclockwise and choose a velocity yourself. That's what that's for. So all of the notes, if I choose 46, then all of the notes that the RPG-8 creates are then going to be a velocity of 46. But I'm going to put this back to the default position of manual. Moving on, we've got hold. This is off by default. If I press hold and play a chord on my keyboard and I release, you can see that none of the keys are highlighted on the on-screen keys. It's holding the last notes that I played. So if I press the keys again, you'll see these light up for a moment, and now it will hold the next chord. and you've got instant Philip Glass. Okay, and we'll just go ahead and deactivate that. That's what that is for. Below that you have octave shift, and this can also be controlled by control voltage. So if you can see here on the on-screen piano keys, I am in octave C4 here. So that's the first key, and it's visually represented with piano keys up here. So C4 on your keyboard is the A key on my laptop keyboard. So if you're using, say, a 25 key keyboard, you're going to be limited to those octaves. You know, you can press, most of them come with or typically all of them come with the octave up and down, but you just have a bit more flexibility here, especially with this being able to be controlled through CV to shift the octave within the RPG-8 itself. So while I'm playing C4, or the octave beginning on C4, I can just come over or come back up. And that's what the octave shift is. So this is just an activation button for turning the arpeggiator on. It's on by default. If I turn it off, it's almost like it's being bypassed. The arpeggiator is being bypassed. It's not active. So I'll put that back on. And below that here, you've got a mode switch. For this will allow you to choose the direction of the arpeggio notes. So the default position is up, and this creates an arpeggio that plays from the lowest note to the highest note. And you can see that here in the diagram. This gives you a visual representation of what's going on with the arpeggiator. So you can see that it starts from the lowest note and goes to the highest here. So the next one, up, down, the notes are going to be played from the lowest to the highest, then from the highest back down to the lowest. And down, the notes are played from the highest note to the lowest note. Random is random. And I'm actually going to drop my on-screen keys a little bit by hitting the Z key here. So that's random. And then manual, the notes are arpeggiated in the same order that they're played when you're pressing them on your keyboard. So whichever you start with first will okay, and so that is the mode switch there, and I'm just going to go back to the default up position. And so next we have the octave range buttons, and these buttons allow you to set the octave range of the arpeggio. So we're just working with one octave. That's all we've been working with so far. If I move this up to, if I select 2 octave, So when you select octave 2 or 2 octave, the arpeggio will be extended to a 2 octave range. So the arpeggio pattern is played, then repeated 1 octave up. And then next you have 3 octave. And 4 octave. And I'm just going to take that back down to 1 octave. And so next you have these insert buttons. And the insert can be used to add variations to the arpeggio. It repeats certain notes in a predetermined order. So it's off by default, and the first one, the lowest note, is repeated in between every second note in the arpeggio. So let me just select that first one here. And then with high, the highest note is repeated in between every second note in the arpeggio. Then you've got 3-1, and with this, it will play 3 notes forward, then step 1 back, and from there play 3 notes forward. And then the final one that you've got is 4-2, and this plays 4 notes forward, then step 2 notes back, and from there play 4 notes forward, and so on. Okay, and I'm just going to turn this back to the off position. And so below this top section here, we then have rate and gate length. So let's just start with rate. And this is just going to set the rate of the arpeggio. And you've got 2 different choices, basically, or 2 different settings. You've got the sync, which is going to be in sync with your tempo, your song tempo. And while I'm at it, going to drop the tempo down to 95 maybe. And I'm just using the minus key on my numeric keypad. Actually, I'll take it down to 90. And so with this, you are in sync with the tempo that you have set for the song. So you can see we've already dropped down a bit. I'm going to hit the plus arrow and then raise my tempo so you can see how the arpeggiator then adjusts accordingly. Okay, and then below that there's a readout for the resolution that you're playing with. We're on 16th notes at currently. So just to give you a better idea of how this works, if I choose quarter notes, then we are in 4/4 time. So we should have 1 note for each bar. So it should match perfectly with the click. So if I turn the click on and start playback, okay, and so that's what the rate does. It adjusts the resolution of the arpeggios in relation to the tempo of the song. And so I'll just raise this back up. I'll go to 8th notes. Okay, and free is it's going to play them freely. I'll start playback of the of Reason so you can hear the click track. And these you can adjust from 0.1 all the way up to 250 hertz. So that's actually pretty cool. I think this knob could be good to do some automation with and do some funky effects with that. So that's free and sync. I'm going to put this back to sync and leave it on eighth notes here. The tie is going to control how long the gate is open. So if I go all the way to the right, then it's just going to be one note there. If I come all the way to the left, there's not going to be any sound at all because we're closing the gate at 0. So this just determines the length of the note, the arpeggiated notes. So this is more of a legato with it all the way at tie. Okay, it's a little addicting using this device. Single note repeat. So this is on by default, and if you just press one note, you see I'm pressing here and we've got tie on, so it will repeat that one note. If you take this off, you're not going to get any, it won't create any arpeggio. Now I'll turn this back on. Okay, and there you have that. And so here we've got a pattern sequencer and a display readout, which we've already talked about here. It's going to give you a visual representation of what notes that you're playing in the range from C1 to C7. So if I hold down this chord, you see we've got 3 steps that are showing because I'm holding down 3 keys. If I then hold more notes down, you'll see those will then be represented. So this gives you a readout of what notes you're pressing, where they are, and what the pattern is actually doing. Right now we don't have the pattern, the sequencer activated, but in order to do that, you just would click there. And now with this, you can introduce rests in between in a pattern. So when you activate this, you are activating 16 steps. So if you hold down a chord with 3 notes, it's going to play straight through the 16 steps for that chord that you're holding. So let's just take a look at that. So it just repeats it for 16 steps, and then with this sequencer you can just create rests. And I'm going to raise the resolution a little bit here to make this a bit more active. Okay, so I think you get the idea there. This steps plus minus to the side, you can control how many steps that you'd like to have. If you don't want 16, you don't have to have 16. Let me just put these back in here for a moment. But if I just subtract, then we have a shorter pattern that we're going to use. And we can increase that. I'm clicking the plus. On back to 16 again. Okay, and when you have the pattern active here, in the context menu, you then have additional options that are available to you. So if I right-click on the RPG-8, you can see we have shift pattern to the left, right, randomize pattern, alter pattern, and invert pattern. So shifting the pattern to the left, so we've got these first three off, on, off, on, off. Let's just go ahead and we'll shift that to the right, and you can see that they've moved one step, each has moved one step to the right. Shift to the left, it's obvious. We go back to how we were before. Now, randomized pattern is going to create a random pattern. If we click it again, you get another pattern. And then you've got alter pattern. So I want to fill some of these in actually. So if you've got a pattern that you've created here, you can come in and you just want to see what happens. You can alter the pattern that you've created. So you just alter, it keeps the same amount of rest that you've put in, but it just creates a new, moves them to a new position. You can see we still have our four rests that are not active. They just get moved around. And invert pattern is the last one here. So whatever rests that we have, inactive steps, it's going to make those active, and the ones that are active, it's going to make those inactive. So let's go ahead and invert that. And there you are. And lastly, we've got shuffle down at the bottom. So with shuffle, it moves all of the 16th notes between the 8th notes. It shuffles those, so it kind of just changes the rhythm. If I turn that off, and then back on. Okay, and the shuffle setting is determined globally by the regroove here. So the global shuffle will affect this one here. And I guess it would probably be important to talk about, well, if you want to record your arpeggios, well, then you just make sure that the MIDI focus is here, and then you press record. stop record and F7 to bring up the sequencer. And you can see that we've got our notes here. You may want to set your left and right loop locators to the area where you'd like to record. You don't have to do that. I just ended up way out here in the boondocks. I'm F4 to close those on-screen keys and G to shrink this out. I'll Control L to put my loop locators there. And you can also, if you would like to have the pattern that you created, the arpeggio, if you'd like to have that as notes for the instrument that it's playing, then all you have to do is select, say we've got our grand piano here, select that track. So this is because what we recorded were the chords that we're playing, not the actual arpeggiated notes. So if I double click and we open up the editor, you can see here, these are our chords that were being played. So these are going to play the arpeggiator, then the arpeggiator is going to trigger the grand piano. But if you would like to have the actual arpeggio in MIDI note form, I'll escape out of that editor. What you need to do is select the track for the instrument that you're controlling with the RPG-8, which is our grand piano. Then I'll F6, come back to the rack, right click, and then you want to choose arpeggio notes to track. Click that, F7 back to our sequencer, and let's mute our ARP track there because we don't want to have it doing double duty. And if I play back, and we have our arpeggiated notes here. And that's using the RPG-8.